Guardians of the Galaxy 2 has been released, and the reviews are very divisive with regards to which one is superior, the first movie or the second one. What exactly could it be that is causing such a division between audiences? Well, in this video, I'm going to see if I can make sense of this and set the record straight. Let the battle commence. Story. What story? Star-Lord steals an orb at the beginning of the movie, which incidentally is carrying an Infinity Stone. Once the Guardians meet, they eventually agree to keep it out of the wrong hands. They fight, they win, the end. Now, something I do want to talk about with regards to story is the exposition. Now, the exposition in some of Marvel's movies is just flat out lazy, and that is especially the case with the first Guardians of the Galaxy. Take this scene for example. These characters clearly know each other, yet for some reason they feel the need to explain things about themselves that their evil comrades should know already.
I'm a daughter of Thanos, just like you.
And then there are some other exposition dumps like this.
Well, I didn't ask to get made! I didn't ask to be torn apart and put back together over and over and turned into some little monster!
Seriously, that exposition was so dry. It really makes me appreciate comic book films like Logan even more, as these movies trusted their audience to understand what was going on without lazily spelling it out for them. Now, the story in Guardians 2 has less of a plot and is more about expanding on a few of our characters' backstories, and most of them are quite tragic, but the best one, surprisingly, was Yondu. Considering how crooked he was in the last movie, he was actually quite sympathetic and likable here. And the remainder of the story focuses on Star-Lord's lineage. Now, due to spoilers, I can't really talk about it, but I thought it was very inconsistent in quality, and in the end, it was just decent. So of the two, I much prefer the character-driven story in Guardians of the Galaxy 2. The story in the first movie is essentially a game of capture the orb, and I found that to be kind of lame. As for characters, we have Star-Lord, Gamora, and Drax. And as far as protagonists go, these three are passable. However, from his very first scene, the one that immediately put a smile on my face was Rocket. He is a greedy, selfish loudmouth with the mentality of an evil genius. However, I will say that as funny as he can be, his comedy can be a bit too childish and irritating at times. But considering how much Marvel can be the patronizing death of comedy, he was much better than he had any right to be. And his interactions with Groot is by far some of the most entertaining parts of the film to me. However, the movie sometimes really tries to hammer in the fact that these guys are a bunch of misfits. I mean, Gamora actually yawns right here during their team walk, just to make sure that we get it. And as for the characters in the second movie, well, it takes place 2 months after the first film, and the characters are actually a lot more tolerant with each other and have loosened up quite considerably. That is especially the case for Drax. I mean, he almost feels like a completely different character. Also, it's worth noting that Baby Groot wasn't in the movie much. Most of his scenes were in the trailer, but he was still a nice addition. But as far as his development goes, it was practically non-existent. As for new characters, we get Kurt Russell, who plays Star-Lord's father, and for the most part, I thought he was great. However, the movie does something with his character in the final act, and although I enjoyed it, it lost what previously got me captivated about his character. We also have this Chinese character, whose name escapes me right now, and it probably should stay that way because there's no other way to say it. She was completely shoehorned into this movie. The film so desperately tries to give her a purpose that it equips her with some important information that she desperately wants to tell the Guardians, but for some reason she doesn't tell them until it's too late. And in the end, there was no reason for her to withhold this information from them in the first place. In fact, it would have been far more interesting if the characters had discovered this for themselves, but unfortunately, they didn't. The only reason she is in this movie is so that Marvel can demonstrate a bit of multiculturalism, but they're not fooling anyone. So it's a close call, but in regards to which movie overall had better characters, I would say the edge goes to the first movie. The character development in Guardians 2 is fine and perfectly fitting for a sequel, but the first movie showed restraint and knew when to go for more quiet character moments. The second movie, on the other hand, just felt like it had to explain everything and constantly threw in too many goofy jokes, and that's what ultimately killed most of the character moments to me. That's not the only thing it killed, but we'll get to that later. Now, Marvel is renowned for having a ton of forgettable, crappy villains, and to this day, this guy's in my top 3 because he is so freaking useless. And to top it off, he looks like a big baby that has baby food all over his mouth. And besides him, we also get Thanos. This is the first Marvel movie where we get a good look at him. We hear him talk and sit in his chair, and declare orders and sit in his chair, and shout threats and sit in his chair. Yeah, Thanos does nothing in this movie except for being a paralyzed Easter egg for fans to talk about. Throughout the entire movie, he is jammed in his chair like a gigantic turd stuck in a toilet bowl. Now the villains in Guardians 2 are these gold people, and they were just pathetic. I mean seriously, this could have been an ingenious gag, but this movie took these guys so over the top to the point that they were practically characters out of a How It Should Have Ended skit. In fact, I don't know what else How It Should Have Ended can do to make them look even dumber than they already did in this film. They are only here as a plot device to damage our main character's ship so that they can crash land on a planet so the plot can move forward. The only positive thing I can say about them is that they do have a couple of funny moments, but even that gets ruined as they follow it up with a joke that's even dumber than the last. And unfortunately, it looks like we are going to get more of these characters in the future as they get their own mid-credit scene. Oh joy. And finally, we have Nebula. Now, as a character, this movie rather effectively gives her a tragic backstory about how she was unwillingly turned into a machine-like form, and it was pretty cruel. She came from a character that I initially had no sentiment, sympathy, or empathy for into this anguished and tortured soul. That being said, when her time came to fight, she sucked. In fact, she sucked so bad that I was actually counting the amount of time she failed to win a fight. For example, there is a scene where she chases after Gamora with a spaceship, and somehow Gamora ends up getting the upper hand and beats her. And I swear, it was at this moment where I thought this character was just a failure. If she can't beat a single person on foot with a frickin' spaceship with heavy weaponry, then what the hell good is she? So the villains in both movies are incredibly weak. However, I'm going to give the slight edge to the second movie, and that's only because the villain in the final act is an incremental improvement over Baby Mouth here. Now, the action in Guardians of the Galaxy is comical and over the top, and all in all, for what this movie was going for, I think it managed to execute the action really well. The only action it completely screws up, however, is the spaceship battle in the climax. The rest of the fight is perfectly fine, but this really just seemed like it was copying so much stuff from other properties, namely Star Trek and Star Wars, and it failed on every level as it showcased absolutely no creativity, and quite frankly, it was one of the most boring spaceship battles I've ever seen. Another problem I have with the action is that there is next to no consequences when it involves our main characters. Either the movie doesn't acknowledge the severity of their injuries, or Mr. PG-13 takes full control. For example, in this scene, Gamora's ship blows up, and even though it's completely destroyed, she doesn't have a single scratch on her. Why to this day no one brings this up, I will never know. Another example is that Gamora wants to steal this orb from Star-Lord, so she uses her knife to knock it out of his hands, and that too is so freaking PG-13. What the hell did she accomplish by throwing the knife at the orb? Throwing it at his back would have been far more practical. At first I thought it was because maybe she just doesn't want to kill anyone, but about a minute later she starts cutting off Groot's limbs and gives him a final stab to the chest. So there goes that theory. Having said that, most of the action is good, but there are definitely severe restrictions, and as a result, this makes the action feel like it has next to no repercussions. Now as for the action in the second movie, it too is a lot of fun, but there is a problem. Unlike the first film, the action is much more reliant on big budget special effects pretty much all the time, and although I found the action to be entertaining, it doesn't have an impact on you like the first movie did, and ultimately that's what makes it forgettable. Although I will say that the climax was far more entertaining, original, and visually superior than the first film, and I have got to give credit where credit is due, as they definitely learned from their mistake the last time. So in the end, I like the action in both movies, but I think the first one was more enjoyable. Now the jokes for all the Marvel movies after Phase 1 have been artificial, fake, and ridiculously exaggerated. In fact, they became so exaggerated that they actually started to break the mood of the films. Now luckily for Guardians of the Galaxy, even though some of the jokes can be really silly, they fit within the movie's established tone, and there are some legitimately good ones in here. So ultimately, as much as I can get aggravated by how lame they are at times, I can look past them. Guardians of the Galaxy 2 on the other hand, there are jokes that work, but the ones that don't really hurt me. Now Drax is a character who I thought had next to no problems with regards to his comedy in the first movie. In the sequel, however, his jokes just don't know when to stop. And that's the best way to sum up the humor in this entire movie. Numerous times the jokes would start out good, but then they would end in such a petty and contrived way to get an extra laugh out of the audience, and it instantly killed the scene. And instead of ending on a high or emotional note, they ended on a dumb one. And heck, other times you will just get some jokes that suck right at the beginning, such as getting a prisoner to suck his thumb whilst he's sleeping. There are so much other forced jokes that are all painful to sit through, but if I talk about all of them, then we'll be here all day. And don't even get me started with the sequel's overuse of pop songs. So with regards to which movie had the better jokes, I would say it hands down goes to the first movie. They weren't always good, but even at their worst, they weren't painful to sit through. They would be cringeworthy at times, but not painful. But still, it absolutely frustrates me that Marvel are still refusing to pull back with their humor. Now I know what you're thinking. Eric, you're exaggerating. A bad joke is a bad joke. I know that, but Marvel somehow have a talent for making a bad joke severely compromise their movies, and that was definitely the case for Guardians of the Galaxy 2. So overall guys, whichever movie you end up favouring really depends on your preference. If you liked the humour in the first Guardians of the Galaxy and you thought there wasn't enough, then you will love the sequel even more. But if like me you thought the original had a pretty decent balance, then the sequel will just come off as obnoxious and overblown. And that really is a bummer, because in all honesty, I personally think Guardians of the Galaxy 2 has all the makings of a superior sequel. If it wasn't for the overly goofy nature of it, then I would actually give it a much higher score than I'm about to. Observe, the first Guardians of the Galaxy gets a 6 out of 10, and the sequel gets a below average 4 out of 10. Now if the jokes were not as intrusive and childish, then I would have given the movie a much higher score, but the damage they caused was way too great. The overabundance of jokes took practically all the movie's awesome and badass moments and made them close on some of the lamest notes possible. And as a result, that really is the fundamental flaw of this movie. If they were fixed, then without a doubt, this would get a far more favourable review from me. So that's it for this versus video guys, thank you very much for watching, stay tuned for the next one as I will be comparing Alien Covenant, Ridley Scott's second official Alien movie, with his first from 1979. You will definitely want to tune in for that. Please give this video a thumbs up if you liked it, and don't forget to click that subscribe button and the bell right next to it if you haven't already. And I'll catch all of you next time. Take care.